Good morning, fifth graders. Ms. Jagodnik here. I'm going to talk to you about lesson 17-4 today. Again, we're in the chapter about stepping up to sixth grade, so some more challenging math topics. And today we're talking about ratios. A ratio is a comparison between two different quantities. We use a ratio to describe the relationship between those quantities. So when you went through the solve and share and the visual learning video, you should have gotten an idea of some of the kinds of problems we use ratios for and how the ratios are written. Now I'm going to take you through the guided practice on page 899 and a couple of the other problems below to introduce you to the more complicated type of problem on this page. So starting with the guided practice number one. Number one asks you to talk about how a ratio is different than a fraction. So ratios and fractions, in fact, as we've learned already, one way to write a ratio makes it look like a fraction. But there is one important difference. When we are talking about a ratio, we are comparing parts to parts. And when we are talking about a fraction, we are comparing the parts that we're talking about to the whole. So we all remember our long time of learning fractions where we talked about the numerator and the denominator. So in a fraction, let's say, for example, I have the fraction 2/3. That means the part I'm talking about is 2 out of 3 altogether. So for example, let's say I have some cats and dogs. I have 3 animals altogether and 2 of them are cats. Then I would say 2/3 of the animals are cats because there's 2 cats and there's 3 animals altogether. Now, if I'm talking about a ratio and I have one that's written in the form of a fraction 2/3, that means I'm talking about part to part. So 2 is a part compared to 3 of a different part. So in this type of situation, it might be something like I have 5 animals. 2 of them are cats and 3 of them are dogs. So then this ratio would be the relationship between cats and dogs. For every 2 cats, there are 3 dogs. This doesn't mean the total number of animals. It means the number of another part. So that's the big difference. Ratio is a part to a part, no matter how it's written. And a fraction is a part of a whole. Okay, question number 2. Ask you to write the ratio of total animals to dogs from page 898 and to write it 3 different ways. So here we're practicing how to write a ratio. So if I look back at page 898, which was your visual learning video, and I look at the numbers that we have here, page 898 tells me that we have 14 cats and 17 dogs. And the problem is asking me to write the ratio. Now we know this order is important. Whichever is written first is the first number I'm going to put in my ratio, and this is the second number because that order can be flipped around. So total animals is what I need first, dogs I need second. Dogs is easy, it tells me there's 17. Total animals I need to figure out. So I need to do 14 plus 17. Very quickly, gives me 31. So I'm going to say total animals first to dogs second, which means I can write it 3 ways. 31 to 17. I can write it with a colon. 31 to 17. Or I can write it as a fraction. 31 to 17. Okay, and again, that's the order. If I asked for the ratio of dogs to total animals, I would flip all of those around. But they asked for the total animals first, so those are the 3 ways I could write it. This part of the ratio is that part of the comparison, and this part of the ratio is that part of the comparison. So there's 31 total animals for every 17 dogs. There's 31 total animals for every 17 dogs. There's 31 total animals for every 17 dogs. Okay. The next few problems are all based on this data that they give you about a basketball team. Okay, so now we have this little chunk of information in your book. I just wrote it over here on the side in a chart because I found that easier to understand. I have a 5th grade basketball team. They have 2 centers, 3 forwards, and 5 guards among the players. So the first one asked me to write a ratio for forwards to centers. And in the directions here, they asked me to write the ratio in 3 different ways so we can continue to practice the different ways we might write a ratio. So if I'm looking at forwards, this is the first thing. So that 3 is going to go first. Centers is the second thing, so that 2 is going to go second. So I can write that the ratio, the relationship between forwards and centers is there are 3 forwards to 2 centers. Or I could write it with the colon, or I can write it as a fraction. Next one gives me a little something extra to do because now they're asking me for guards. That's easy. I see the number is 5. But then they're asking me to compare it to total team members. So now, just like the last one, I have to add these up. The total of those 3 is 10. So then my ratio here is going to be 5 to 10. And then here's the other 2 ways that we could write that. And then the final one asks me for centers. That means the 2 is going first. 2 guards, which means the 5 is going second. So 2 to 5. And then I'm going to write it the 2 other ways with the colon and as a fraction, always in the same order. Okay? Okay, so once I get into my head that I need to make sure that the order is the same as what they're asking for, and that those are the 3 different ways I could do it with the word to, the colon, or the fraction form, then this is pretty easy, right? Everything is flowing along nicely. But I wanted to go over a few of the problems at the bottom in the independent practice section, because this is where they step it up a little, and the book asks you to figure some more things out, a little like we did the total here. And each section of the ratio is not just one number you're pulling out of the information. It's something that you have to put together, which requires a little more careful reading. So I want to go over a few of those examples. We're going to skip ahead to number 10. This is the blood donor information that you're using for the whole bottom of this page, but we're going to skip ahead to number 10 because numbers 6, 7, 8, and 9 were very similar to what we already did. We don't need to do them again. You can try those on your own. But here we have our independent practice number 10 asks me for A plus and AB plus donors, or we could call that positive. A positive and AB positive donors to O positive donors. So what I like to do is find the 2. The 2 is always what separates the first part from the second part. So if I have more than one thing in a part, then I need to put it together before I do my comparison. So A positive is 45 plus AB positive is 6. So this is really 45 plus 6. That is 51. So my first part of my ratio is going to be 51. And then O positive is right here. It's 90. So this ratio is going to be 51 to 90. Again, the directions asked me to write it by showing them all 3 different ways. So I can do that here. Okay, number 11 asked me again. Here's my 2. The first part is A negative and AB negative. So A negative is 21 and AB negative is 4. So altogether here, my first part of my ratio is going to be 25. Now the back is total donors. Whoa. I was going to say we were going to have to do a lot of adding, but they were actually nice enough to give us a total 195. So this is 25 to 195. Of course, if they did not give you the total, then you would have to add up all the different numbers and get that total before you could finish your ratio. Okay, so now I have to write it the other 2 ways with the colon and as a fraction. Okay, number 12. Again, I'm going to find my 2. Here's my first part. Here's my second part. So I have A positive and B positive. 45 plus 20 is 65. My second part is A negative and B negative. So 21 plus, oh no, that must be a very rare blood type because nobody had that. So that's really 21 plus 0. So it's just 21. And then I can write it with my colon and as a fraction. Okay. And number 13. Okay. Similar. Here's the first part because there's my 2. And then, ooh, that's a little different. All right, let's figure out the first part first. O positive is 90 and O negative is 9. So this first part is 99. 2, all others. I do not see a row called all others. So they have not been as nice this time. What do I know? I know the total 195. So here's my total 195. And they're asking me for all others, meaning everything other than this. So I figured out the 99. I can subtract that from the 195. This requires regrouping. Okay. Regrouping again. Oh, no, sorry. Okay. 18 minus 9 is 9, 96. Okay. So 96 is my second term. Okay. So now I have 99 to 96, 99 to 96. Okay. So there we go. Okay. Now, the final question I wanted to go over on this page was number 14, because number 14, they flip the script and they ask you to do it the other way. So instead of asking you to find a ratio, and you have to pull out the right numbers and put them together in the right order, this time they ask you, here is a ratio. Based on what we see in the chart, in the information, what does that ratio represent? So now we're looking at the numbers and we're asking to match them to the parts. So 6 to 21. I'm going to look through my data. This looks like my only 6. AB positive. Okay. 2. 21. Looking through the data. Here's my 21. A negative. So that's what those two terms, 6 connects to the AB positive and 21 connects to the A negative. So that's what that ratio must represent. Okay? So that's ratios. In a nutshell, what you have to remember is that a ratio is a comparison that tells the relationship between two different pieces of information, two different parts of something. And it can be written in 3 ways. It can be written in language with the word to in between. It can be written with a colon in between to separate them, or it can be written as a fraction where one term goes on the top and one goes on the bottom. It's important to keep the terms in the right order. Otherwise, your ratio is going to be exactly the opposite of what you're trying to say. And it's important to look for that word to in the middle when you're trying to come up with a ratio to make sure that you're not fooled if they ask you to add more than one thing together or figure out a certain section. You might have to do that before you write the ratio. So your job now is to go on and complete the rest of these pages, page 899 and 900, the rest of these independent problems. And as we've already discussed, there's no practice buddy or homework pages in this chapter. So you should make careful note of any problems that you're confused or have a question about. And make sure next time you meet with your teacher live to bring that up and ask her to explain it to you. And I will see you again in a couple of days.